UFO invasion. This is part 2. This is going to be a full tutorial on how I made this scene. It's going to be a little different from my first, but I think it's a little bit more informative, so let me know what you think. Okay, this video will be the step-by-step walkthrough of the UFO invasion scene that I did. I know I went pretty fast on the last one, so I'm going to do a live commentary, one of the first that I've done, and I'm going to see if it can be as fast and as good as the other one. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a ground plane. Scale it up with S, and this is going to be where all the buildings live. I'm going to drag over my screen here and then add the asset browser. I already have these 20 low poly buildings that I got on CG Trader. CG Trader is a 3D modeling platform. I get a lot of my models from there. Some of the first models that I ever used for 3D commissions were actually from CG Trader. So you're going to add these buildings to your scene. Just by dragging them in if you have them in the asset browser. If you don't know how to get them into the asset browser, I will be making a video on that very shortly. And when you get as many buildings as you want in the scene, you can notice that the origin is at the top of the building when you want it at the bottom, because if I scatter these, the buildings are going to be like on this plane wherever the origin is, and they're going to look like that, which is not what we want. So I'm just going to take one of the buildings. I'm going to go into the front view by clicking 1 on the numpad. And now I'm going to set origin to center of mass. I'm going to 0 out the location. And then I'm going to go set origin to 3D cursor. This will make it show the origin is at the very bottom of the buildings. So that guy's done. I'm going to set origin to surface. And then I'm going to set the location to 0. Set origin again to 3D cursor. This building is done, and next I am going to do it with a bunch more. I'm just going to speed this up. Once you think you have enough buildings, we're going to test out if that theory is true. Select all the buildings that you have, and our main goal for this is to make sure that we don't see any duplicating buildings when we scatter them. So I'm going to click M, new collection, and then I'm going to add this to a buildings collection. And I'm just naming it, so when we go into the particle properties, add a particle setting, go to hair, click advanced so you get the rotation, and I'm going to go to render and then collection. And then if I set the same buildings collection, you can see all of the buildings are doing as intended. That's a lot of buildings though, so we're going to actually turn this down, and we're going to put the scale to 1. That's going to be really big for now, so actually let me make it a reasonable size. I'm actually going to scale this up too, so we get a little bit more like that. Let's check that. So if I were, you can see a lot of these buildings here. That's probably going to be too many, so I'm actually going to disable the particle system right now, and I'm going to make more buildings. And then with the buildings that I just made, which are these, I'm also going to put those in the buildings collection. So now that I have a little bit more, I'm going to turn this back on, and that's looking a bit better. You're not seeing as many duplicates, but maybe you just kind of have to fiddle with this a little bit. You might be able to find a place that looks pretty good, like maybe like right there. I kind of like for my composition. Let's zoom this out, and I want to make the camera look like it is from a building, like someone standing on a building. So just like kind of frame that up however you want. Maybe like right there would be cool, because these buildings being right next to each other kind of makes some sense if they're from the same like developer. So I kind of like that composition, like right here. Also, if you didn't know how I immediately shifted the camera to where I was, if you click Control Alt and then 0, it'll set the camera to wherever you're looking. So that's a really big trick that I use for like every single one of my scenes. Okay, next, I think the buildings are actually pretty good, so I'm actually going to drag those to the side so we have a little bit more room to work with. And next, we are going to go to the modeling portion of this video, which is going to be the UFO. We're going to want a UV sphere. And I really like the UV spheres. I know some people don't like to work with them because they have these triangles here, and triangles are not always the best thing, but for something that's as cylindrical as this, it kind of makes sense to use a cylinder. So I'm going to click S and then Shift Z to scale on every axis but the Z axis. to get kind of this like little disc shape, like you see in most stereotypical UFOs. Next, I'm going to grab the top faces and I'm going to extrude these upwards to get a little bit of shape. And I'm going to go into the modifiers tab and add a subdivision surface. You can see it kind of smooth out a little bit, and that's kind of the look that we're going for. I'm actually going to scale this down a little bit and maybe drag this in. That looks pretty good. I'm actually going to set the scale as well because I don't want that to mess up the way that the bevel works. I'm going to shift this bevel down just a little bit, and I'm kind of seeing a saucer look. So in the last video that I did of this, I was going really fast, and so I'm trying to slow down with this. Hopefully the video is not too long. I do a lot of my videos on TikTok, so I really try to rush through what I'm doing, but what I realized with YouTube is that you don't really need to rush. Like, you got all the time in the world if people are going to watch it, so let's hope these longer form videos do a little bit better than I'm expecting them to do. Maybe it's just my pessimism towards how difficult YouTube is. I kind of glossed over what I just did there even. I went Shift Alt to grab an entire row and then E to extrude, and then I got like this little rim here. I made the rim a little bit bigger in this one, and I'm also going to grab all of these faces and inset them with I to get a little bit smaller of a circle in the middle. Select it with Alt Shift and then extrude that one with E as well. I'm also going to go Control R to add a loop cut to make this edge a little bit sharper right there. And that's looking pretty good. I'm seeing that I have a little bit of stretching in the middle here. That's just kind of what happens when you use triangles, so don't be too freaked out about that. I'm just going to inset this even more, and that's looking pretty good. I'm actually, maybe I'll take this and make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, something like that. Does it help if I shrink it down or up? No, I think that's pretty okay actually for a flying saucer. If we go back to our camera by clicking O, I'm going to drag this down and kind of place it where I want it to go in the scene. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I'm not entirely sure if I want to completely copy the last one or just kind of give the same atmosphere, like it's destroying. Maybe it's just another part of the city that this is destroying. I just want to try a little bit harder to make the tutorial followable for everybody of every skill level, because I don't want to have like a beginner come on the tutorial and love everything that I do, but then not be able to recreate it, because that's kind of unfair to them. Okay, that looks pretty good for these. Next, we're going to build the beam. And the beam is going to be made with a cylinder. So I'm going to drag the cylinder up, and I'm going to scale it up on the Z-axis. And I'm also going to set the scale by going Shift. How do you set the scale again? Do you ever like do something just by muscle memory and then completely forget how to do it before, like when you're actually trying to like say it out loud? I do it all the time. Why can't I think of this? Okay, I remembered. It's Control A to set the scale, and that'll just make it so if I add, like, let's say a bevel modifier, it'll be the exact correct bevel dimensions. Whereas if I remove it and I scale this up, like, or scale it down like that, and then add a bevel modifier, you can see that it's like barely affecting it because it doesn't know the correct scale. So if I click the scale, it'll add a nice bevel to that. I'm actually going to go back because I had it correct the first time. Add a small bevel to the tops here, and then I'm going to add some loop cuts just to make sure it has enough geometry for the displacement we're going to do. Shift over the screen and go to the shader editor, and we are now going to work on the texture of this beam, because the texture is really just kind of what makes it. It's really just a cylinder. So I'm first going to add a mix shader, and I'm going to add a layer weight. The layer weight is one of the best ways that I found to get detail in textures. What the layer weight is going to do, if I plug it into the material output, is just get like this nice froncel of black and white on the edges. And if we grab a color ramp and scale the black and white values in, you can kind of see how I'm making white on the sides and black on in the middle, and that's exactly what you want to do. You are going to plug your color ramp into the factor of the mix, and then we're going to get an emission node and plug that into the other shader. And so what this node network is saying is take the principal BSDF and put it into the black portions, and then take the emission and put it into the white portions. So if I scale this to, let's say, 100 strength, and then turn this to like a orangish red, you're kind of seeing how that looks. And if I go into rendered view, you can now see what we're working with. I'm gonna make the beam red. That's looking pretty nice. But this is right now just a completely straight lined beam. We want to add a little bit more to it by going to the modifiers panel and going to displace. And what displace is going to do is use a texture that you can add here and then displace it depending on how you want it to look. You can also do that in the normal here. If I go to displacement and then add a displacement right here, I can basically do the same thing. I just like doing it in the modifier page because I find it a little bit easier at times. So I'm going to add a texture. I'm going to go to the texture properties and add a cloud texture. And you can see it's doing exactly what it should. Add a subdivision so it looks a little bit smoother, and maybe turn down the strength so it just has a little bit of warble. It's not going like insane. That's looking pretty good. What else could I do to this to make it look better? I can try adding transmission to it, so it's like the black portion is actually completely transparent. Turn down the roughness, and that kind of adds like a glass laser beam type look. And you can kind of see it through the buildings, which I also kind of appreciate. So let me shift it down. Yeah, actually, I didn't do that on the first, but I really do like that. So I'm going to go to 0. And I'm going to shift the beam in position. See, I could just also copy these attributes. I might do that. Yeah, 17 here, 21. I'm just copy and pasting these, and then get 25. Great, now it is at the exact angle that it should be. Set it, put it downwards. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. I'm actually going to scale this. Go Shift Z, and then click Shift Z again, and you can scale on the local origins. So instead of going regular Shift E and it like kind of distorting, I can do that and make it a little bit skinnier. Also set the scale just in case you mess that up. Now that you have the laser beam, I'm going to add an environment texture. And this, you can use any HDRI you want. I have a couple that I always use and really like. The one that I used for the last video is the Sky is on Fire 4K. I got this from HDRI Haven. Set the strength to 1, and you can kind of add as much or as little light as you want. I'm gonna maybe set that to like 0.1 so you get a little bit of that ambient glow. And you can see the background here. It's not exactly what I want it to look like. That's a really, really huge building there. So if I go into the world shader properties, you're going to get to this node network. And this node network is basically taking that HDRI and putting it as the background. What you can do if you have Node Wrangler enabled, which you should, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then Node Wrangler, enable that add-on. And when you do that, you can go Control T and then add this mapping and texture coordinate node. With that, you can take the rotation of the HDRI and find what you want the sky to look like. Probably something a little bit, maybe with a little bit of light. Oh yeah, I like that lighting there. So I'm going to put it kind of right there, because if the sun is going that way, you're going to get a little bit more light facing this way, which is, I think, what I want from that. Yeah, I'll be blurring the background a little bit so you won't see it as sharply, and that'll really help with the fidelity. If I go to my camera settings, turn on depth of field, you can select the sphere and then turn up or down the f-stop to, yeah, about 0.2 works for me. Just mess around with it and whatever looks good with you. I'm going to add another beam and find the rotation of the spaceship by just copying the numbers. Yeah, that's getting somewhere. I might make this one even. We'll mess around with where we want those in the frame later once we have a building to destroy. And that's the next portion of the video. The next portion of this video is going to be the cell fracture add-on. This can give people a lot of trouble, but it's a really, really great tool to use. So next we are going to destroy this building with cell fracture. The way that cell fracture works, first we're going to go to preferences, add-ons, and then if we type in cell fracture, you can enable it right here. Once that is enabled, what this is going to do is basically break this mesh up into a bunch of pieces. Click on your building, go to edit, and then menu search. Type in cell fracture, and the cell fracture panel will pop up. There are a lot of settings here. I don't know what they all do, but source limit is how many pieces you want this broken up to. Let's go to 300. Recursion is how many times they like split in like a smaller way. I'm going to turn that to 1. And I'm also going to put these objects in a collection, and the collection is going to be called cell fracture breaks. And I'm just doing this so they don't all show up in the outliner here. Just going to click OK. And there's your cell fracture. Hopefully it worked. It's possible that it didn't. I'm going to move the cell fracture breaks back into here, so we have our correct plane over there. And yeah, that doesn't quite look right. Yeah, the building's really not supposed to look like this. The reason that this happened is because it wasn't finding enough vertices to split it as many times as I wanted. So if you're going to do a simulation with this, this is definitely not acceptable, but for what we want to do with it, it's going to be totally fine. Okay, side note, it totally wasn't fine. I actually had to redo the cell fracture, so kind of just ignore this part, but okay, the more and more I look at this, I was just trying to wing it. That is certainly not going to work. There is just too many pieces that didn't break there. So apologies for that, but I'm going to redo that process. But we're just going to try to redo that again. No biggie. It's just more practice. Let's just call it that. Let's go back to menu search, cell fracture. I'm going to turn this down to 100, and I'm going to use the own vertices. Actually, 200 is fine. Let's see if that works a little bit better, and I'm going to put that in the cell fracture breaks collection. Okay, so it looks pretty bad still. Let's see if these are just a little bit less particles, though. What we're really just looking is for like a decrepit building. If you want to model this yourself and not use cell fracture, that also works. I've learned that the cell fracture is a really easy way to just get started with this. Actually, when I'm destroying like bigger chunks of this, it actually is looking pretty good. It's like the building is like, oh, don't do that. The building is like in ruin. That looks pretty solid. It's maybe get rid of these bigger chunks, and we can get rid of more and more depending on what you're seeing in the scene. But if you just get rid of some of them, you have this like decrepit building looking thing. I actually got rid of the base. That's unfortunate. This is going to be in the cell fracture breaks. Great. If you right click on this and then select objects, you can select everything in that collection. That's one of the reasons I like putting them in its own collection. And I'm going to bring it over to where our scene is currently. Oh no, I just realized that I messed up the particle system by taking out one of the buildings. So I'm just going to find another seed that works for my scene. You can definitely like move it around. Oh, that's not bad either. I might do something like that. You get a little bit more of that up close and personal look, which I kind of like about this scene. I want it to be like very visceral. And to see a little bit more of this scene, I'm actually going to change that to 32 as well. So you have a bigger focal length. Yeah, that works. Select the objects and move them a little bit closer to your scene, wherever you want the big explosion to be. So these buildings really wouldn't be intersecting, but I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. I kind of like the direction that we're going with this one. If the thing is blowing up here, and maybe this guy, maybe they're actually targeting this building, and maybe there's like, this is like a scientific research lab, and all the aliens are like, we can't have these pesky humans researching. That's ridiculous. I don't know. I like building lores around the the stuff that I do. I feel like it helps me kind of like set the scene. But I think that's looking okay. Next thing that we're going to do is make the particle system. Make sure you don't have the cell fracture breaks clicked, like the collection clicked. Go back to this collection, and then click on a UV sphere and add a UV sphere to your scene. This is going to be where we have the particle system. So if you go to particles, add another particle, and then do an emitter. Now when you click space, it'll be emitting these halo objects, and we don't want these placeholder objects. We actually want like real geometry. So we're going to add a piece of geometry. I'm going to do an icosphere, and I'm going to set this icosphere to a subdivision of 1. So it's like a pretty simple mesh. Next, I'm going to add the material that we use for this beam, and I'm going to rename it beam texture, and go in and set the beam texture so it looks, yeah, that looks pretty cool. So that's going to be the particle that we scatter by going to here, instead of halo, doing an object, and then this object is going to be this sphere that I'm going to call particle. Awesome. And now when you click space, it's actually emitting these things. Go to also turn on the rotation, turn this to like a random 1, turn up randomize all the way, and now they have a little bit more like differences. Also, you can turn the scale randomness up, so there are going to be some bigger and smaller ones. That is fitting the scene how I want. Now I'm going to, you don't actually want to see this ball. What I like to do is click new and then turn this to a transparent object so you can see it straight through it. So now that you have this ball, I'm going to put it in this building, or kind of around where I would think that this explosion is happening. And then I'm going to click space and see what it looks like. It's not really going everywhere that I want, so if you go to the physics property and turn in Boolean drag, that'll make a lot more sporadic movements. And actually, let's add the mass. Let's make the mass like really small so they kind of go everywhere. That's like too small though. Yeah, kind of like that. Also, you can change the velocity to see how fast they're like shooting out of this like particle setting. Yeah, that could work. This is just kind of trial and error. Let's turn it to 5,000, see how that looks. Huge explosion. Yeah, that covers it up. Oh, also, I totally forgot. If we grab another one of these beams, shrink it down, and then go Shift Control Z again to expand it outwards, you can get this like huge explosion ring. And I'm actually going to accentuate that by clicking on a ring, going to proportional editing, and then going random, and then randomizing with proportional editing what this sphere is going to look like. So really just like bursting it outwards like that. And let's see how that looks. It's right now hidden. We shift it up. I could see that. It's a little bit weird looking, but you can mess around as much as you want with this. Let's turn off the bevel and put the subdivision at the bottom here. And you have this kind of like fire giant particle thing. And maybe you add like another one like behind it so it looks like it's like happening a lot of places, like this huge explosion. Yeah, that looks okay. And what I did for the last one that made I think it so cool that I kind of glossed over in the other video is for this plane at the bottom, I even added a collision, and so these objects are going to collide with the ground, and it gives a little bit more of a bouncing effect, so it spreads out entirely, and I think that definitely works. So what I'm going to do next is make instances real, basically making all these particles real, and then I'm going to combine them all by clicking join. Well, I need to click on one of them. So I clicked on one, and then I click join. Oh, okay. So right now it's scattering that all of these particles that I just did like multiple times. And so when that happens, if you go to the sphere, okay, here it is. When we turn that off, it didn't scatter all of these particles. But now we have this particle system. We can like scale it up, scale it down. I like working with particles when it's an actual object because you have a little bit more control. So I'm actually going to add another particle effect back here. And so I don't have to do multiple simulations every time I want to do particles. I just can have them in my scene. I think the middle part is looking a bit tacky. This explosion thing. I might be able to change that by going to the bottom and then shrinking it down or shrinking it up. Let's shrink it down though, so it gets a little bit more of the waviness. And then point it towards us, finding where the glow works the best. Actually, it would kind of make sense if they were being, if this beam was actually what was doing the damage, it would probably be facing like the same way as the beam. So maybe I need to add 2 and have them facing the same way as the beam, so it looks like something's actually happening with it. Yeah, actually, yeah, that's much better. Okay, so I guess one of the last things we have to do is to texture our spaceship, and we can do that by just making a new material. I was kind of going off script by making my own material here, but it didn't quite turn out. All you got to know is I turned metallic all the way up and the roughness down a little bit, and then you'll kind of be caught up. So unfortunately, I don't think that is looking very good. So I'm going to take that texture out. I'm just going to do what I did in the original video and set a Musgrave to the roughness and turned the dimensionality down and the detail up to get some of those like nice scratchy rust looking things.
And then I'm going to add a color ramp and shift that in where I want them. Maybe turn this a little bit so it's not completely reflective.
Yeah, maybe something like that. Oh, I really like that other side. I kind of want to put that on. Let's name this UFO. Let's name this one UFO, get the same texture. And maybe I want it facing it, because I really like the way that this bottom looks. A little bit better than I even like the top. Okay, so that's why there's so much light in the scene. This does not need to be there. Okay, that makes it look much, much better. Okay, composition time. I sometimes struggle with this. Go to viewport. If you want to cheat, it's not really cheating at all, but you can turn on this thirds grid and then kind of line up some of the elements with this grid. Like this could be kind of in the center. I kind of like how it's taking up this portion of the screen though, so I'm actually going to keep that. But I think this might be a little bit distracting being like coming off the screen, so I might try to take that down to like all the way in the scene. Or maybe we just have both of them facing like that. That's dramatic. I kind of like that. Oh, another thing that we can do is add some more buildings and then raise them up so you get a little bit of those like background details. Kind of like maybe if we push up the city a little bit on that side. Not too much, like right there. And that's going to be the end of the video. So sorry I had this panel up, the shader panel up, like half of the video. We were using it intermittently, but I could totally have shut that down. This is the final piece. Thank you so much for watching one of my longest videos yet. If you got to the end, leave a comment. And if you really like the video, subscribe for more. Thank you so much, guys. See ya.